YouTube. This is the 31st JavaScript project. To follow along, I leave the source code in the description box. We are going to create the budget tab. Here we are going to enter the budget tab, and this is expense. There is also added the validation on each submit. If I type the amount, you can see the budget will be populated. The total is calculated automatically when you enter the budget. Along with that, when you type the expense, it will be populated on the expense list along with the budget amount will be calculated. If you wish to delete, you can delete it as well. Let me add one more expense and it will be calculated and the amount will be detected. If you wish to delete, you can delete it as well. Now you will see 100 would be incremented. Yes, it is done, and now 300 would be incremented, and that's working perfectly. This is the JavaScript project. We are going to do this in the object oriented way. So let's get into it. This is the project structure. We have one index, script and style sheet files, and these are the steps we are going to follow in the object oriented way. I'll leave this step also in the description box. Fine, let me start the script from scratch. Let me take everything. It's 148 line in total, and let me show you what are the HTML we have. So if I refresh, you can see this is the first form, which is budget. It is inside the card. The budget form is the form and the input ID is budget. And now the expense form. It's the ID of the form, and this is the ID of input field. What is the reason? And this is the ID of the expense amount. And then we have the amount details. And these span would be populated. And I have noted the ID as well. And this is the table. It is a stable structure, but it is in the form of div. And this is a div which is going to get dynamically populated. For time being, I'm pasting the design. Fine. This is the ID of the dynamic div which should be appended when you enter the expense. And this is a script which is linked over here. It's in the current directory. The very first thing is I'm going to create a class UI, and this UI will hold all the IDs which I have taken it in the HTML page. And now let me create an ID property. It would start from 0 and then an array. The array would be the collection of expenses. Let me define it. Now we are going to use just like jQuery document.ready. Here in JavaScript we would be using DOMContentLoaded. When the DOM content is loaded, I want to initialize the form and add a listener submit to it. Let me check it is working or not. It would work. When the DOM is loaded, I want the alert message. The alert message is not showing up. Let me see why. Let me add a window, and it is because The DOM is capital letter. Document object model. Fine. Now you see, when the DOM is loaded, you are getting the alert message. The next is, let me take the form, or let me just call the JavaScript code and add listener to it. Let me store it into a variable which is budget form, and this is the expense form. Now call the variable budget form and add listener submit to it. So when the submit button is clicked, I want this function to get executed. This is the callback function, and I'm going to add the submit event to both the forms. Since I'm defining it over here, I don't want it on the class. I'm removing it. Now we have done this. Now let's create, or let's initialize the class. The class name is UI. This is how we initialize the class. Once we initialize, we can use the object and properties of the class. I have not created the function budget submit yet, but I'm going to create it in the class. So when the button is clicked, this function should get triggered. And let's create after the constructor. Now here what we need is, if the value is blank, I want the alert message to show up. If the value is blank and it is less than 0, this is the variable which holds the input field. If it is blank and or it is not and it is or, it is less than 0, then I want the alert should show up. Usually this way it won't work, because we are just referring the variable. To refer the value, we need to use a property value, input.value. Fine, now it would work. If it's blank, then we would show a message like input field cannot be blank or less than 0. Else show the budget amount over here. Fine, we have taken the span and stored it in the class as this property name dot text content. We can paste this value, input field value. So if I type something and click on submit, there is an error. Let's see why. I have used the UI. Before that, I want to remove the prevent. I want to remove the default behavior of form, that is, the hash is added when I click on the submit button. I don't want that. To remove it, you can use e.prevent default function. When you click on the submit button, what it does is it is going to refresh the page once. I don't want to refresh the page. Cannot access UI before initialization. We have initialized the UI over here. It is because of the let. Now you can see if it is blank, it is showing an error. If it's not blank, the amount details is going to get filled, and that's working. Now when the amount is filled, I want the budget to get automatically filled. So for that, but after clicking the submit, I want the value to get disappear on the text field, and that's working. Once budget is added, show the total, create function for show total. Here you have to understand one thing: to show total, it is just not depend, it is, the total is not only depend on the budget, it is also depend on the expense. So for that we have to create another function which is show expense, or you can give any name. Let me see. So we need the expense first to calculate it. So let's create a function. For temporary reason, I'll just manually enter the amount expense and it will return 400, or we won't return anything, we just paste the 400 on the HTML. So with the help of the span which we have used over here, expense span, with the help of text content property, we can give the value to the HTML. So this text can be accessed over here. Once we get the expense, now let's calculate the total. The total would be the budget, which we can get it on the text content of span, along with the expense. So what we need is, to calculate this, we need to convert it into integer. It would be in the text format, that is string. We need to convert it to the integer so that we can subtract. Now the total, we want to display it on the span tag of total. This variable holds the id, sorry, this variable holds the div, or you can say span, to display the total amount. Now let's check. It is going to populate the value, and again it is going to make it blank, and that's what it does. And again we have an error, the show total, and the show total is going to call the show expense. Show total is not a function. UI.showTotal is not a function, it says. We are already inside the class, so we should not use a class name, we should use this keyword. That's the reason. If you are the outside the class, you can give the reference which is UI. Now we don't need, since we are already in the class, we can use this keyword. And now you can see not a number, it's showing up. Let me see why. This is the budget we are getting, and then this is the span. Let me console and check both the value, that is the budget amount and the expense amount. We are not getting the expense. It is because it is getting initialized after the calling of total, so we need to paste it above. So the 400 will be given before the calling of total. Fine. Create a function to show we have created this, call the, we have also done this. Now the first section is completed. Now let's get into the second section, which is expense section. Now when you click on a expense button, or you can say submit button, you want to execute a function, and this would be the similar as like the budget submit. First we are going to check whether it is empty or whether it is less than 0. If it's empty and less than 0, we are going to show the message in the if block. If not, we are going to populate the values to the expense list. Now we have two variables in this form. The first one is reason, that is where we have spent, which is a string if it is blank, or, and this is the amount. The amount will have two conditions, if it's blank and if it is less than 0. It's not and, I'm sorry for that, it's or. Now let's check. It's not showing up. Let me see why. We are just simply referring to the variable. We need to get the value of the input field. We should use the property dot value, and sorry for that, and the validation is working fine. Now let's create an, we have done the validation. Now let's create an object, and this object will have two key value pair. The first one is id. This is similar to this one, and then the reason. And again one more key value, which will be the amount. The reason for giving id is so that we can easily remove it, and we need to pass this to an array. Create an array. Before that, let me increment the id. We have already created the id. I'm just going to refer it, and this array, this object will be pushed inside this array. And let me show you on the console. So whatever you type on the expense form, it will be converted to object, and the object would be pushed inside the array, and now you will get the array as an output. There's an error, expense is not defined. We have to use the let keyword. And I want to make the text field blank after submit. That's what I did. It's the first one. Let's add one more time. This is another expense, and there will be two objects inside a single array. You can see the count is 2. Fine, it's working. We have cleared the input field after submit, and now create a function, append dynamic, and we need to pass this array to this function. Let's create a function, and let me name it as append on dynamic div, and we are passing the array. Now we can access the array inside the function. We are going to append a row inside this div, which we have already defined it on the class. With the help of inner HTML, we can paste whatever HTML we want, and to append it, we would be using plus equal to and a backtick. And before inserting, it's an array, so we need to access it one by one. So for that, I'm using for each. So let me show you one by one. That is, you'd be getting individual object of each array, of single array, and now it's one object. And if you type, you'll be getting two objects, because we have passed the object inside the for loop so that we can access one by one. And what we need to do is, with the help of the one by one variable, we can access the keys, and we need to populate the keys inside this section. So with the help of dollar curly brace, we can use the key and you'll get the value. This is another key, which is amount, and the data ID, we would be passing the ID over here. Fine. Now there's an error. So it is because of this keyword. Let me show you what the error is. The JavaScript is not able to find what is the meaning of this, so it is going to give you undefined. So what we need to do is, this is simply the class. You can see this is simply the class. So this, we are passing it to a variable called self, and this self we will be accessing it in place of this, and this, by this way you can do it. So on each submit, I want to modify the expense. So we remove the temporary one. We would be using the array function, which is reduce. I'm going to copy the array, and I'm going to have the reduce function to it, so that we can get all the total amount of expense we are passing through the form. So we would be passing two variables, the accumulator and the current, and in the second argument we would be defining the current variable to 0, and it will always return the accumulator. Now we are going to add our current is an object, and the object's value is amount, and we would be passing it inside the form, so that we need to convert into string, we need to convert it to the integer. That's why I'm passing %. Let's store the total inside a variable called z, and this z we will be replacing it, or you can say x would be replacing the 400, and let's call this function on submit. So along with the expense list is populated, let me define let to it. Along with the expense list populated, we are going to calculate on each submit. You can see it is calculated. 1000 minus 300 is 700. Again, let's add another expense. Now it would be 600. The total amount would be 600. Now you can see the array is getting appended. So what we need to do is, we need to remove the previously shown value before appending. So for that, I'll use a while loop. This while loop will run until and unless there is first child on the container. So here the container is dynamic data here, and we need to remove the first child until there is the first child left. Fine, now it would work. Instead of repeating again, it will delete all the array which is already shown here, and it will insert it again. You can see this is the error we were getting. Now it will now we won't get, because we have run the while loop. And now after submit, there would be only two values, and that's working. It's another expense. I believe the final step left is deleting the array. Let me add another expense. We have the total 500 amount left, and that's working. Now let's modify the array. By clicking on the delete, we want to remove it from the list, as well as we want the data to be recalculated as per the total on the expense list. So for that, let's call the parent, or you can say the container, and we need to add the listener, click listener to it. Why we adding click listener? It is because the data is the list are getting dynamically appended, so we cannot directly pass the click function to the button. We need to pass the click function to the container, and this container will pass the click to the child of the container. So in this case, the child of the container we need is button. So with the help of e.target, we can know where we have clicked on the container. So wherever we click, I'm clicking on button, you're getting the button. Here I'm clicking on text, and I'm clicking on text, you can see. And now if the class is I have not defined the class. Yeah, let's get the font awesome class. If the class is font awesome trash, then it will be true, or else it would be false. False, you can see false. Again it is false. And now if I click on font awesome icon, it is going to give you true. And now when it is true, I want the element to be passed, into another function inside the class UI, and this class would be remove expense. UI.remove expense. Let's define it inside the class, and as an parameter we would be getting the element, and we know the element is simply the I inside the anchor tag. So what we need to do is we need to get till the parent. So the I parent is anchor tag, and we need to get its parent. So again, parent element. So we'll be getting deflex, and now we have to choose the column sm4, again the parent element, and we need to get the parent of the column, and it would be the total row. So again the parent element, and then the remove. So when you click on the button, what will happen is it will be removed from the expense list, but it will not be removed from the array. So to show you, let me add some more expense. If I remove it, it is getting removed, but if I re-enter again, the value is still there on the array. So the three values will be appended. So now what we need is, when I remove, I want the value to be removed. So for that, let's call the array, and this array we will be using the filter function. filter function, just like the condition, we will be accessing one by one filter function in the variable arr if, or you can name it anyway, let me make it an object. If the object's id is equal to the id which I'm passing now, how to get the id? We need this id. We have already access to the I which is inside the anchor tag. And we have a data hyphen id. To access them, we would use dataset dot id. And if the id matches, then what we need is I want to it's not equal to, it's not equal to. If it's not equal to, then return the array. So we'll be getting all the id, all the arrays object which is not the id, and we'll get the new array. And what we do is we'll assign this new array to the previous array. This is the previous array. So before that, let me append it to the div as well. Call the previous array and assign it to assign it. Now we'll pass the new array. Now this is a new array now, and that would work. But the value, it will be deleted from the array. We have to use let keyword. It will be deleted from the array, but the value won't be calculated. So to calculate it, what we need is we need to use the two functions which we have already defined above, show budget and show expense. You can see it is not getting calculated. It's 300 now. So if I delete it, you can see 300 is still 300, but the expense is just 300. So let's call the two function. If I remove 300, let me add one more expense. Let me add another expense. Now the 1000 has depleted. Now if I remove 300, so there would be the calculation like 1000 minus 300. So 700 would be the total amount. It's not getting later. Let me see why. I think it is because we are not clicking on the font awesome icon, we are clicking on the button. That's the reason. Made a mistake. The total amount is not a number. we have to pass 1000 to the budget amount before doing it. Now let's add the expense. Now if I click on the button, it is not working. If I click on the font or the icon, you can see it's working. Now again 300. $300 would be subtracted from the expense, so what would be 300 left? You can see 300 is left over there, and if I remove the 300, 0 would be there, and that's getting calculated. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for listening.